Hello everyone. My name is Jonathan Benton and I'm the content editor of the Parliament magazine. Welcome to today's webinar, which will look at closing the Dieselgate Saga, paving the way for a fair and green recovery of the European car sector. Before we begin, we'd just like to introduce you to the GoToWebinar platform that we are hosting this event on. What you will see on your screen is our presentation displayed across the bottom half of the page, while above will be our presenters' webcams. The webinar features one video message. If for some reason this does not display properly for you, then you may need to, you'll be able to review it after the webinar on our YouTube page. What will follow is a series of speeches and a question and answers debate. And should you have any questions to put to the panel, please submit them via the questions feature. Throughout the webinar, we will be collecting these questions from here and submitting them to our Q&A chair, who will then put them to the panel. When doing so, please can you also include your organization and job title. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to give the floor to our first speaker, our host of today's webinar, Mr. István Ujhelyi. Mr. Ujhelyi is a member of the European Parliament from Hungary, part of the group of Socialists and Democrats, and has been in Parliament since 2014. He sits as the vice chair of the Committee on Transport and Tourism. Mr. Ujhelyi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have the easiest job today afternoon because I'm the host. Maybe it's easier to be a host than to show the future and the good way. Welcome from the Parliament. This is my office here in the European Parliament. You can see I'm sitting in front of the green wall. It's a real one. It's a real green wall. So good afternoon, Excellencies, dear friends. We are living in unprecedented and challenging times. This may be the first time in human history that all of us are subjected to the same threat at the same time. It may also be our ultimate chance to fundamentally redo how we respond to such challenges. All over Europe, common coordination is what we need now. That's why the last months we in the Parliament created and made decisions about very, very important topics about the European Health Union, about the European travel and tourism. But now we would like to speak, of course, about the car industry. How can we manage the responses on COVID-19 if the member states, the regions, each develop their reactions by their own? The combination of environmental degradation, global warming, failing disease management, increasing malnutrition and water shortages, and now the COVID-19 pandemic, they propel the other question: what do have to change? What is our responsibility? The World Health Organization established what we instinctively understand. All of these challenges hang together. Worse, they reinforce one another. Whether you are a person with a respiratory disease or an environmentalist, a car owner, a car producer, or a regulator, we have to all answer the same questions of required change. Uniquely, all of these are represented among our speakers and in very wide audience. Change requires foresight. So we are privileged to have the Vice President of the European Commission tasked with exactly foresight, Mr. Maros Šefčovič, in our midst. We shall listen carefully to his understanding of causes and consequences of do's and don'ts of guidance, how to resolve our most compelling challenges, and do what we can best and easiest do first. As a Vice Chair of the Parliament's Transport Committee and as member of the ENVI, so Environmental Committee, I believe that the recovery of the economy should come through the European Green Deal. There is a unique possibility with the German presidency define the most suitable strategy for the future of Europe through the Recovery Fund and the 7 years MFF. Today in this webinar, the main focus on the emission and the health issues related to cars and what are the possible scenarios for the future of the industry. But I would like to underline, to find a real compromise, a sustainable economy is needed. I accepted this invitation today because of the dedicated work of Mr. Pavel Pok, former member of the parliament and my friend, who is a strong advocate of environment. We have excellent speakers today. Let's start with my friend, fellow politician, an excellent commissioner who knows much the car industry and have insights in energy issues as well. So I'm very pleased to give the floor to Commission Vice President Maros Šefčovič from the next door from the other building. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Anna, could you share the video? I'm sorry, we're having a technical difficulty there. We'll have to bring the video back later on. I suggest we continue with the agenda, I'm afraid.
Okay, I don't know what's happened. The modern technology system doesn't want to help us, but then I will ask Mr. Axel Friedrich, and I would like to tell you, Axel Friedrich was among the first to uncover the car industry's use of hidden software that manipulated emissions test results. He's a German exhaust gas emissions expert and currently the project leader of the Emissions Control Institute of Environmental Action, Germany. Dr. Friedrich, I leave the floor to you and thank you so much to have you here.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Yes, I have 40 years now experience in these areas, which is quite long and very broad experience. And I have learned what industry do and what they should not do. So let's start with my first slide. Yes, if it's possible to close the Dieselgate saga, that's the question. I'm not sure. I tried in my last 4 years everything I could do to close it, but the industry was not very willing, and all the politicians were not very willing to go ahead. Yes, next slide, please. Some problems. Next slide, please. Yes, if you want to swim in the future, you should not have a millstone around your neck. And of course, the milestone around European cars industry is a Dieselgate. So if you don't solve the problem, you have no bright future. And these people have not understood until now. We have a huge amount of cars on our road which violate the legislation, the rules, and pollute our environment, and also lead to killing of people. And these people have to understand, especially in this time, I think my colleague will speak later on, we know in the meantime that air pollution enhance COVID-19 numbers and also severity of the illness. And this, I think, is a signal people should understand. It's not a nuisance. It's a big threat to our health. Next, please. And to protect the people, we have a European Air Quality Directive 2008-50 EC, in which gives standards member states, cities have to fulfill. And what happens? Many cities in Europe violate the NO2, nitrogen dioxide standard. What is the reason? When I was working in the Environment Agency, we made a proposal to meet these standards. What should be the limits for cars and trucks? And the standard for cars was 80 milligram per kilometer to ensure that all cities in Europe meet this 40 microgram annual mean nitrogen oxide standard. So if the cars emit much more than the 80, then of course you cannot meet the air quality standard. And this is what we see. Next, please. And if you look on the consideration of the European Directive 715/2007, it's clearly said the goal of this directive to have these objectives met, and by doing this, we need standards in the real world to meet these standards. Nobody makes a standard for a laboratory. So obviously, I think it's funny if people argue we have to meet the standards just in the lab, not in normal world. And clearly it was said in these considerations, we have to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions so far in order to meet these air quality directive goals. Next, please. And it's one very important point, and I was involved in defining this rule. It's clearly said defeat devices are not allowed. Defeat devices are illegal ways to go around the legislation. And what defeat device means is any element, senses temperature, speed, engine speed, transmission gear, manifold value, and so on, should be not modulated, delaying, or deactivating of any part of the emission control system, which reduce effectiveness of emission control under conditions which reasonably may expected under normal vehicle operation and use. I think it's very important because we had a long debate on this word normal use. And the car industry argued it cannot make us responsible for minus 14 degrees in northern Finland or the high altitude of the Klaus-Dockner pass. And that's the reason why we said, no, we don't want you to make you for extreme things responsible, but for normal use. And of course, a defeat device which reduces effectiveness of these emission controls shall be prohibited. So clearly it's not a wording which I think you can misunderstand. Next, please. And we have limits, and we lowered the limits from Euro 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it was in Euro 3 was 500 milligrams, Euro 4, 250 milligrams. And by political compromise, we had 180 milligrams for Euro 5. And for Euro 6, it's 80 milligrams. This was a goal we had in the beginning defined in order to meet the air quality standard. It was a long political process. You know, I think how difficult it is to get such standards. But in the end, we got the standard which we need to protect the people and the environment. Next, please. But what happens? The emission factor, which is the average of emission of a car for Euro 3 was 1,153. Euro 4 was a little bit lower, 989. But if you look on the emission factor for Euro 5, it's 950. It's virtually the same as for Euro 4. This was not the goal of Directive because they want to lower the emissions. And if you take the Volkswagen, which some people believe is the only one sheets, out of this 950, the value is 1,159. For Volkswagen vehicles, it's only 787. So it's not the Volkswagen problem. It's a problem of the whole industry. And people have to understand this. So I think it makes no sense only to chase Volkswagen. It's good to chase them, but we have to chase the others as well. And even if you look on Euro 6, it's 614. much more than the 80, which is the goal. Only very recently, when we hit Euro 60 temp, the emissions are below the standards which they should meet. It took a very long time to go down to these levels. Next, please.
It is okay. Right. It is right. Yeah. Perfect.
As an example, if you see 6 cars in real world, you see they are much higher than the 80 milligram. So, as I said, the standard is 80, and these cars have more than 1,300. The standard for Euro 1, introduced in 91, was 1,050. So this car not even meet Euro 1, the first limits for diesel cars which were introduced in 1991. This, I think, is a scandal. And these cars are still running around on our streets and roads. Unbelievable, unbelievable. So it's not 10 or 15% higher. It's a factor 16 higher than the standard factor. And nobody is doing this besides some NGOs. Next, please. Give you an example. Renault S-Bus. We made a measurement in a lab. You see the top is the one which is used to make the standard in the laboratory to meet the standard. And it's, you see it's very low. But if you make the same test on a laboratory and you make a warm start, you see how much the emission explode. You see the gray scale at the end of this graph. This was higher than the laboratory instruments were able to measure. And this car is still around on these conditions on our roads. I think this is a scandal. Next, please. What can be done? And we have developed retrofits for diesel cars. Here is an example which I had measured. Before retrofit, it was 1,030 milligrams. After the retrofit, it was 50 milligrams. So below the standard for Euro 6. So much better than most of the cars, Euro 6 cars on our road. And until now, we have only in Germany a legislation which regulates this retrofit of cars. Why we have no European legislation? If the standard for Europe is a European standard, why the Commission have not taken any efforts to develop a European retrofit directive? I can't understand, because this would harmonize a market and would make the cost lower. But we always argue why we need harmonization. But in this case, no member state was active, and all the Commission have done not what they should have done. Next, please. What we need transparency. A customer should know if he buys a car, what are the emissions of my car? What happens today? Manufacturer manipulates the cars even if he owns a car from far away. These people have to know. We need hardware retrofit for all Euro 5 and Euro 6 cars, light-duty trucks, which emits more than 270 milligrams per kilometer NOx in normal use. And of course, this cost should be covered by the manufacturer because they saved money. And our highest court in Germany just said they have done this only to get higher profit, for nothing else. This was the rule of our highest court in Germany. And should be a publication of all defeat devices. I'm running around and try to find out what defeat device car manufacturer use. Why? This is a job of the agency and of the car companies. Should be published. I would like to know what defeat device is in my car. This is not what the NGOs have to do, and should be a penalty who used defeat device to cover external costs of excessive emissions, because we have high damage to the health and also to the environment. And who is paying this? We, as members, people of the member of the European Union, we pay for this damage and should be paid by the one who made the damage. And this is a clear demand. And this, I think, if you see how much Volkswagen or other companies paid in the United States to cover the damage, which is much higher than what we demand here. But why You pay nothing here if you cheat and if you really kill people and destroy environmental structures. Next, please. We have no independent control. So the manufacturer don't follow legislation. It's not only in the case of the diesel car emissions. I can tell you many other examples if they can save money. So therefore, we need to change the whole certification system. We are talking now on Euro 7. But if we have not solved all these issues, why we need lower standards if we don't solve these problems? And it's based only on real world emissions and in combination with effective penalties. Many member states have still not yet installed penalties for violation of the legislation, even also Germany. Should be a control of the data by independent bodies. The system should be transparent. All RDE tests data must be published immediately after test, which is not the case. And the test and the control should not be paid by the manufacturer, but by a small registration fee. What happens now? The car manufacturer says, we have paid the test, so it's our test results. Which is ridiculous. You don't get the information for the test. Why? Because we have paid it, it's our test results. So thank you very much. I think I showed you how big the problem is. Next, please. If you have any questions, you can come to me and ask me. This is my email. And the next you see, which is my car, which I drive only 800 kilometers a year, 18 horsepower and still running, and mid Euro 2. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Axel. Mr. Friedrich, it was very, very interesting with lots of information. So I think we have to read all the pages. So it was very, very interesting. Thank you so much. I just got the information from the Parliament magazine. Something happened in the air between the Commission building and the European Parliament. I hope later we will have the message from Maros Šefčovič, but now I would like to invite Dr. Martin Oosting. And now I would like to tell you before Martin, may I remind the audience that you can submit any questions that you may have for our speakers through the chat function of this application. So if you would like to ask, please write it into the chat function. So next is Dr. Martin Oosting, the chairman of the supervisory board of the Stichting Car Claim, a foundation working towards a suitable solution for all European car owners affected by the Dieselgate. Also, as a former Dutch ombudsman, he is uniquely positioned to provide his insight. So thank you so much. Good to have you here. Dr. Oosting, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, and dear members of European Parliament and dear participants to this conference. I first of all would like to thank the chair of today's important conference for inviting me to address all of you in my capacity as chair of the Supervisory Board of Car Claim Foundation and as the voice of the many millions of European consumers that are affected by the Dieselgate scandal. Since this scandal emerged in the fall of 2015, Car Claim Foundation has been at the forefront of the efforts to convince car manufacturers to accept responsibility for their actions, to clean up their closets and to compensate those who were harmed by their behavior. Already in 2017, the EMIS Committee of European Parliament published its excellent report, clearly pinpointing where our European and national institutions have failed to prevent the massive breach of European law by the car industry. Since then, disappointingly little has changed. There's mounting proof that the car industry has continued to make use of defeat devices up to this very day. Tens of millions of dirty diesels are still crowding the European roads, significantly contributing to serious public health problems and environmental harm. European car manufacturers have largely turned their backs on consumers during the last 5 years. National politics in member states protecting perceived job security play a critical role in shielding the car industry against the looming costs of compensation for the harm inflicted on European citizens. European institutions have been much too passive in tackling these problems. Despite strong language and condemnation of the behavior of car manufacturers by various past commissioners, the European Commission only half-heartedly takes on member states that fail to properly enforce the existing rules. This situation has allowed European car makers to continue to generate record profits with the use of old technology. However, it has also resulted in these companies becoming extremely vulnerable to outside competition. In today's webinar, we learn that the ambitions of the new Commission, as set out in its Green Deal, remain unchanged. Various programs aimed at making up for the technological backlog and driving innovation and new job creation in the automotive industry have been developed. Programs that should be further accelerated in these unprecedented times of COVID-19. Undertaking a journey at full speed into the future, however, cannot happen without due reconciliation with the past. Consumers in Europe have not been blind to the obvious fact that car manufacturers have brought tens of millions of defective products on the market. As a result, consumers have sought refuge in large numbers in courts all over Europe. However, despite the massive litigation against companies such as Volkswagen, the car industry is hardly scared off by court cases. In fact, it has emerged that car manufacturers have agreed on an apparent collective strategy of stalling against all claims as long as possible. They invest billions of euros not on compensating car owners, but on legal fees to delay cases as long as possible. In their defenses, car manufacturers make maximum use of the inaction of national type approval authorities. Furthermore, car manufacturers count on the fact that although hundreds of thousands of consumers undertake legal action, this will eventually only include a relatively small percentage of the total numbers of affected car owners. Car manufacturers also massively postpone the outcome of court cases in order to maximize the height of a potential set-off of usage fees for miles driven during the time that consumers continued to use the cars against the compensation they are ordered to pay. With this strategy, they aim to save millions of euros per day. It is again up to the courts to rule on the immorality of such practice. On top of that, car manufacturers have been able to successfully postpone rulings from national Supreme Courts and the European Court of Justice by quickly settling claims in full in anticipation of far-reaching negative rulings, much to the frustration of all those many judges who are confronted with an overflow of their judicial systems. Although tens of thousands of cases against Volkswagen have been processed in Europe's legal systems, there are still approximately 80,000 individual cases and mass claims pending in the various European courts. Only last May, the German Supreme Court finally got a chance to set an important precedent in which it qualified Volkswagen's behavior as immoral. However, this has not resulted in stimulating Volkswagen's willingness to settle. I can report this firsthand that in our own case, a mass action procedure in the Netherlands, which has already been running for over 3 years now, Volkswagen never responded to calls for out-of-court settlement. Volkswagen is not on its own. Daimler and BMW are suspected by the European Commission to have colluded with Volkswagen on the use of inferior technology in their diesel cars, needing them to cheat on real driving emissions. Tens of thousands of cases are pending against Daimler. Similarly, we noted a new wave of cases against BMW. In the event that later this year the European Court of Justice will render a judgment on the definition of forbidden defeat devices, in line with the conclusion of Advocate General Sharpston, the floodgates will be opened for claims against many other car manufacturers as well, such as Renault, PSA and FCA. It is a public secret that all these companies have applied some form of so-called thermal window or other defeat device in their diesel models. Our courts have so far been the only reliable factor in protecting the rights of European citizens during the Dieselgate scandal. I'm extremely worried about the enormous burden that the car industry puts on our national courts that already suffer serious backlog due to the COVID-19 crisis. I am deeply concerned by the total lack of corporate social responsibility of the car industry in two consecutive ways. Of course, and first of all, the Dieselgate scandal as such. Numerous courts at different levels in different jurisdictions have condemned the actions of Volkswagen and other car manufacturers as unlawful and in blatant violation of legal regulations regarding environment and public health. An embarrassing outcome for such an important industry. But moreover, in dealing with the scandal against this background, it is unacceptable that car manufacturers persist in rejecting any willingness to settle. Acknowledging the risk of a serious destabilization of our civil courts resulting therefrom in the near future, this behavior is careless, both towards deceived consumers and to society as a whole. Mr. Chairman, I therefore urge the European car manufacturers to turn halfway and to show readiness for consultation aimed at a friendly settlement. I also appeal to the bodies of the EU to make an effort to ensure that the car industry recognizes and takes its responsibility in this regard. An initiative endorsed and guided by the European Commission, whereby representatives of the car industry on the one hand and representatives of the various stakeholders affected by the scandal on the other hand, will negotiate a reasonable compromise to clean up the harmful effects of Dieselgate, would be an excellent way to achieve this. Stichting Car Claim, also speaking for its many partners all over Europe, is ready to participate in such initiative. We believe that such a solution is feasible. In fact, such compromise would largely mirror what has happened in the United States, where consumer claims, environmental claims, administrative claims, and criminal claims were largely addressed in one series of settlements. Only when the Green Deal will go hand in hand with such a clean deal, the path will be cleared toward a sustainable future for the European car industry. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hosting, dear Martin. And now I think we have some news from the Commission. We will try it later. That's why now I would like to invite our next speaker, who is my fellow countryman Zoltán Masai Kosubek. He's policy manager for health policy coherence at the European Public Health Alliance. He's a legal expert, among others, leading Health Alliance work on the political, environmental, and social determinants of health in policy areas such as international trade, health inequalities, and clean air. And of course, I have to tell to the audience, Zoltán also helps our big fights for the European Health Union project to support the Commission and the Parliament to have a better European health structure. So, Zoltán, the floor is yours, and thank you to have you here.
Thank you very much, István, for that, and thanks also for the organizers to inviting me. I'm very pleased to contribute to the debate on behalf of the European Public Health Alliance. And I would like to demonstrate making 5 key points how a fair and green recovery shall look like after Dieselgate from a public health point of view. Because indeed, as István just mentioned, a health union also includes a healthy transport and road transport policy, so it is definitely part of that puzzle. But before going to my 5 points, I would like to start to make an individual case of a patient to demonstrate that air pollution is actually a matter of life and death. The case is from Ella Roberta, who was 9 years old in 2013 when she unfortunately died due to the asthma attack. And it was just later on discovered then when she suffered from asthma attacks, there was linked to illegal level of air pollution in London. She was not alone. She was one of the other 27 children who also died the very same year, just in the UK. But she is the first one, in a sense, that it could be demonstrated that the primary cause of her death was air pollution. And this is just to keep our mind when we discuss 1,000 and 10,000 of numbers, that every life matters, and even one death is too much. So with that introduction, I would like to go to my first point about air pollution, which is a public health emergency. And basically, it damages the whole body, each organ, and is responsible for many deadly and costly chronic diseases. Chronic diseases such as respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, cancer, but it is demonstrated that it attacks the unborn children. It is linked to diabetes, dementia, and other conditions. One of our member organizations, the European Respiratory Society, recently pointed out that there are more than 71,000 peer-reviewed studies making the link between air pollution and chronic diseases. If we talk about road transport, the pollutants which we can point out are nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and ozone, which are responsible for those diseases. And as regards PM and NO2, around 40% of their emissions is attributed to road transport. And this is also a public health issue of the cities. And in 2017, 2/3 of city dwellers suffered illegal level of air pollution reaching the WHO standard. So there is a real urgency to act. So my second point is, obviously we are in a COVID-19 situation, and there is a consensus, a growing consensus among the scientific community that air pollution actually exacerbates the burden of COVID-19. The two principal ways is that, as I mentioned earlier, air pollution is responsible for chronic diseases. And if you look at the COVID-19 fatalities, almost all of them had one underlying condition. So that's one way how air pollution acts. The other way is if you live a polluted area, that may affect your immune system. So people suffering air pollution will be in weaker positions to fight the actual COVID-19 infections. And the latest evidence is just a few days old. It was published recently, indicating that air pollution can be attributed 10% of the COVID-19 infections and 15% of the fatalities. So the evidence is growing, let's put it that way. My third point is, just going to Dieselgate and road transport specifically, is obviously there is a link between the Dieselgate road transport and the health burden on air pollution. And if we talk about Dieselgate, it is often we talk about consumers, we talk about illegal emissions, but the patients who suffer from that, so the health burden and legacy of Dieselgate is often forgotten. And even the cleanest technologies, the cleanest diesel cars are not clean. And as recent measurement proved that the diesel filter or the regeneration of those diesel filters can also emit a large number of harmful pollutants, and that was recently confirmed by the measurement of the Joint Research Center. As Axel mentioned earlier, there is a consumer case, and fortunately there are some developments due to collective redress actions where in Germany there is an agreement between Volkswagen and the consumer groups that car owners will be compensated to some extent. But the story is not over, because that obviously that doesn't affect other countries. And while car owners are compensated, what about the patients? And here I would like to make a point on the healthcare costs. What about the national governments and the healthcare budgets? Because in a recent study from CIR Delft, it estimated the healthcare costs linked to road transport between 60 to 80 billion euros for the European Union. And the difference is exactly because of Dieselgate, because the lower number was calculated with ordinary testing methodology, while the true methodology resulted a high number. So I think that compensation, the healthcare compensation for national healthcare budget, should be also part of the discussion. My fourth point is that then just moving forward, so what are the lessons learned from the COVID-19 and the Dieselgate, and how should we move forward? As a lawyer, I can only say that we should implement the existing legislation and we should improve them. And considering any unnecessary delays is at least an irresponsible decision. We experienced clean air during the lockdown measures, and recent surveys confirmed that every 2 citizens out of 3 wanted to keep that free level of clean air. And when we heard about car industry demands to extend the application of the emission standards just to allow to sell the older Euro D temp type cars, we have to think twice about that. It is just making the business model unsustainable. Even the car industry associations that demonstrate there is significant difference between 6D and temp and 6D as regards NO2 emissions. So we would pay then the price in terms of more diseases and more healthcare spending if we go that way. And this is, I think, the Green Deal and the Clean Deal was mentioned. It is just not sustainable with the goal of a new recovery. The current discussion is about. So what we have to do when we have ambitious economic packages, it should be linked to condition, and we should definitely favorize zero emission models. And I would like to finish with my fifth point. So how basically the car industry can benefit from such an approach. If you look at the electric car market in Norway, it was 6% in 2013, 42% in 2018, and now it is 60% in March 2020. The numbers in Germany is 9.2% in March and almost 12% in France. So there is a feasible way for the car industry to go that way. And if you put the business model in that sustainable way, that will also supported by battery gigafactories. A dozen of them is planned for 2013, and the whole supply chain that will also generate additional jobs. So what is good for a sustainable car industry, in our view, it is also good for public health. So thank you very much. I think I will finish here. I'm looking forward to the debate and discuss this further with you.
Thank you so much, Zoltán. And if anybody has any kinds of question, please send it to the chat application, chat wall. And now, if the information is correct, I hope, then now we will have the video message from the Commission. Vice President Maros Šefčovič. I asked the Parliament Magazine organizers to give us the video message.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address this webinar. It is a timely event as we turn our attention to building a more resilient Europe out of the ashes of the COVID-19 crisis. The pandemic has had a devastating impact on our economies. Unemployment may hit 10%, and the EU's GDP is predicted to contract by 8.3%. The auto industry has been one of the hardest hit sectors, and yet Europe needs a strong and competitive car industry. Our automotive sector employs 14 million people and provides over 7% of the EU's GDP. However, we should not simply seek to bounce back. Rather, in recovery, we must continue transforming the sector into one fit for the future, especially with the twin green and digital transition being accelerated by the crisis. To make the most of this opportunity, what is required is investment of innovation, of capital, of political will to ensure the European automotive industry can grow, remain competitive, and adapt to the era of sustainability. And there are clear trends. For example, the sale of electric vehicles increased significantly in the first quarter of 2020 compared to the same period in 2019, by 148% in Germany and by 123% in France. At the same time, sales of cars with internal combustion engines fell by 25% and 39% respectively. Member States have been investing heavily to support the industry, with at least 15 having set up scrapping and purchasing schemes to remove polluting cars from European roads. We must ensure this is accompanied by efforts to encourage cleaner means of mobility, notably by providing support for recharging and refueling infrastructure, including for hydrogen. The 750 billion euro recovery fund proposed by the Commission, the Next Generation EU, will aid these efforts as part of the European Green Deal. The skills agenda for Europe will ensure that workers are equipped to meet the needs of the future, including expertise on big data, blockchain, software development, artificial intelligence, and mechatronics. We will invest in improving connectivity, building on the Commission's existing plans to facilitate the rapid deployment of 5G networks. And we will support cleaner transport and logistics, including the installation of 1 million charging points. Let me first focus on a clearer mobility. Clean mobility is a must if we are to meet the ambitious targets we have set ourselves for carbon neutrality. And batteries are an integral part of this drive. By 2030, more than half of passengers' vehicles sold in the EU will be electric, compared to 2 to 3% of today. In 2017, I established the European Battery Alliance to develop an innovative, sustainable and competitive battery value chain in the European Union. The alliance has attracted around 440 industrial actors and some 100 billion of euros in investment. And we hope this growing industry will provide up to 4 million jobs by 2025. Then, in 2018, the Commission adopted the Strategic Action Plan for batteries, setting out concrete measures to ensure European competitiveness in this area and to decrease our dependence on third country suppliers. In order to facilitate the full value chain in Europe, this plan aims to support scale European battery manufacturing, secure access to raw materials, develop a skilled workforce and accelerate innovation and research, and ensure consistency with broader EU regulatory and enabling framework. Last year, we approved the first important project of a common European interest in the field of batteries, involving 17 companies in 7 member states with a total investment exceeding 8 billion euros. A second, even bigger cross-border project is currently being prepared, and I hope that it will be approved still this year. These ongoing efforts will help us reach the goal of increasing the production of batteries to an annual 400 gigawatt hours by 2030, equivalent to 7 million electric vehicles. My second point today is the key role that connected, automated and smart mobility will also play in transforming the auto industry. The connected car market is expected to be worth 34 billion euros by 2025, with more than 100 million connected cars. And we are in a good position to take advantage. The EU already produces nearly half of the global supply of car electronics, and 70% of cars worldwide have software based on the EU standards. To help make the most of this opportunity, the Commission adopted a strategy for connected and automated mobility, which includes the development of a new partnership on safe and automated road transport under the Horizon Europe program to help shape our research agenda. And with the general safety regulation, Europe has adopted a legal framework that will allow the safe deployment of autonomous driving. Thirdly, employment and skills. We cannot forget the impact this revolution in mobility will have on those who work in the auto industry. As we make the move towards clean mobility and automation, it is crucial that we develop relevant skills amongst workers. To that end, the European Commission adopted a skills agenda earlier this month, including pacts encouraging stakeholders to commit to supporting the workforce in individual sectors to get the skills they need. The automotive sector and its ecosystem is a good candidate for such a pact, and the industry has already indicated its readiness to move forward on this as well. With SMEs facing particular difficulties in this sense, the Commission is also launching the competitiveness of the enterprises and SMEs. SMEs are a vital part of the EU economy, responsible for over 80% of jobs, and the driving force behind the development of new technology. Innovation is the key to our future economic prosperity, something anticipated in our European Green Deal, and we should heed the lessons of the current pandemic. To conclude, let me underline once again that we find ourselves in a time of great change. COVID-19 is not the cause of this trend. It has simply amplified. But such far-reaching change also presents us with opportunity. And we have already seen that the industry and member states are willing to take on this challenge. In fact, the change must be industry-led, but the Commission will do whatever it can to help. If we get this right, the recovery can be a stepping stone to a stronger, more resilient and more sustainable automotive industry.
Thank you so much. We got the message from the Commission, and I'm really happy to. One moment, it's something happened with my computer. The system is not the best in the European Parliament, so next webinar will be about the digitalization in the European institutions. I think we have to organize a webinar to speak about it. So, dear colleagues, we got the message from the Commission. Mr. Šefčovič did it. Thank you so much. And thank you, the Parliament Magazine, and my friend, Mr. Polk, who organized it. And now I will give the floor to Ms. Mary Paul Benassi, who will provide the first response to the speeches we just heard. Ms. Benassi is head of Unit for Enforcement of Consumer Law and Redress at the European Commission's Director General for Justice and Consumers. She will joining via telephone, but before that I have to tell you we are running out of the time from my time, because I have to leave to the airport to Charleroi, which is very far from the Parliament. So I will give this serious job to moderate to my excellent assistant colleague and friend Attila Benedek, who is responsible for all the dossiers in the TRAN committee. He knows everything better than me. You can think about that. So I will give him to do the moderation. But now the floor is yours, Mary Paul Benassi. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you. I hope you hear me.
Yes, it's okay.
So I'm Marie Paul Benassi. Thank you. I'm Marie Paul Benassi, head of unit in DG Justice and Consumer, and I'm in charge since quite a lot of time, in fact, of enforcement of consumer law and redress. And I must say that from the beginning of the Dieselgate, my unit and my team has been following, of course, what was happening, and we tried to look at the position of consumers in this scandal, which the previous speakers have perfectly well explained as many different dimensions. So just would like to recall what we have been doing when in 2016. In fact, once we started to have more information about the scandal and what was the different its different elements. The first thing which the first actions which have been undertaken were from our colleagues from DG Grow in relation to type approval legislation, and there has been an acceleration of the reform of type approval legislation, and also there has been some infringement proceedings against certain member states for incorrect implementation of the existing legislation, and especially in relation to fines, as the first speaker has mentioned, the fact that fining is one of the elements that should be implemented by the member states as part of the type approval legislation, and was not implemented in certain member states. Then, in relation to consumer protection, I think that a commissioner of the time, Ms. Jourova, who is now Vice President for Values and Transparency, was extremely clear and one of the first to take a position and to say that consumers should be treated by the Volkswagen Group equally and fairly across the European Union, and that there should be no difference that these consumers are living or residing in Germany, let's say, or in other member states, because the evaluation at that time was that 8.5 million of consumers across the unions were concerned, and several car brands were concerned. Some of them are very popular in various member states. So this statement was extremely clear. She started a dialogue with the company Volkswagen in order to recall all these principles to the management board and the CEO of the company. Our intervention in the domain, and this was supported by national consumer protection authorities, was mainly in relation to the sales and guarantee directive, because the problems related to type approvals were for our colleagues in DG Grow. So in relation to guarantee, it was very clear, and Volkswagen never denied that the car had to be fixed, and properly, and that the emission limits had to be respected on road transport. And so our dialogue with this company resulted in a lot of proactive activities from Volkswagen to reach out to all the consumers across Europe, and also ensure all these consumers the easiest solution to repair the cars without inconvenience for them, because this is also a requirement of the directive, and also that in case they have problems following the repair, they can also complain to Volkswagen for further measures on their engines in relation to 11 different car parts. Then, and I think that this is a big success for European consumers, but European consumers of the future. This is the adoption very recently of a political compromise on the Commission's proposal for new collective redress instruments, which we call the Representative Action Directive, which is going now to require the member states to implement in all the member states, because this is not yet the case, a system for collective redress for consumers. This is a very specific European type of system, which should be the main actors in the system will be what we call the qualified entities. So consumer associations or specific administrations that can bring to court request for compensation for redress. And in this system, there is also now the possibility for cross-border actions or even EU-level actions, which would have been necessary in the case of the Dieselgate. This system is going to so has been now the subject of a compromise between of an agreement, of a political agreement between the Council, the Parliament, and should be finally adapted hopefully before the end of the year. Then it's a directive, so it means that there is going to be transposition work to be done and some implementation for legal implementation from the member state side. So we expect the system to be ready in 2 years' time or 2.5 years' time. So this is where we stand at the moment. Politically, I would like to say that we still continue to think that all consumers across the Union have to be treated equally and fairly. And therefore, when there is some settlements which are agreed, this should be considered also for consumers wherever they are. If the infringement, if the problem is the same, then it should be really an equal treatment of consumers across the single market. Because the single market is a big advantage for consumers and for traders. And so this should also be a reality when something goes wrong. And so this is what we are trying to work for with all our different instruments, the representative action that I mentioned, but also what we do in terms of cooperation of consumer protection authorities. We are trying to build systems which can enable consumers across the Union to obtain the benefit of their rights. And when something is not working well, then when there has been problems, equal redress across the Union and equal access. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Benassi. It was an excellent presentation, and we really know now all the details and all the results what the Commission reached concerning consumer rights and these very important topics. And I think it was very good that you made your presentation and added value what Mr. Šefčovič mentioned, because it shows us that the role and the task and the responsibility of the Commission is very complex. So thank you really very much. We should turn now the question and answer session. We got many interesting questions, mainly to you, to Ms. Benassi. So I would like to mention 2 questions now. First, currently the EU Just Transition Fund and Just Transition Mechanism are focused on coal-related and carbon-intensive regions, but there is no just transition plan for the 2.3 million automotive workers in Europe. How will just transition be guaranteed for worker participation? So this is the first question. And the second question, we got many interesting topics, but the second question is, what is your expectation of outcome of court cases? So these are the 2 fields.
On the first question, I'm really sorry, but I'm not at all an expert in this transitional funds setting, and I cannot answer this one because it's not at all in my domain. On the question of the outcome of the court cases, I think that there has been very important judgment taken recently by the High Court in Germany, and we are expecting, I think this was Martin mentioned, we are expecting the ECG judgment on the defeat device nature. So I think that with these two very high level conclusions, I think that they will be taken into account in all the pending cases. I don't see how they cannot be taken into account. But of course, each of these cases are extremely specific. They were brought by various groups on various type of legal basis, asking various types of demonstrating various type of losses. So it's difficult to really see what could be the outcomes, but at least the key elements have been established in the High Court, the first one in the High Court judgment in Germany, and then also the Advocate General statements on which was also which he presented a few, let's say, 2 months ago. So we are now expecting, of course, the judgment of the ECG on this one.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Osting would like to ask a question, if I...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to join the last question answered already by Mrs. Benassi. As a responsible person for law enforcement, I would like her to dwell upon this question. How can we help you to fulfill your very valuable position? The two ways may be: do you prefer mass litigation, or can we help you to find compromise? Thank you.
But you know, the Commission, in consumer law, the Commission has no enforcement role. And so enforcement is done in two ways. The first one is public enforcement, which is done by public authorities. And this is done by each, of course, depending on each member state, there is a different system which is put in place. But in many member states, for example, you have a consumer and often consumer and competition authority, which is looking at breaches to consumer law done by various businesses, which are impacting and creating a harm for consumers. So the collective interest they take into account the collective interest of consumers. And in the EU, we now have an instrument which is called the Consumer Cooperation Regulation, or CPC, Consumer Protection Cooperation Regulation, which asks the member states to coordinate their positions when such breaches of consumer law have a cross-border dimension. And even a step further, when this infringement have a union dimension, the Commission is also intervening and coordinating the member states in addressing the breaches. And as part of this, but this is a regulation which has been adopted in 2017 and which is now in application from January 2020. So in this regulation, there is a possibility for consumer authorities working together in a coordinated action to ask a commitment from the company which has been found in breaching consumer law to address the problem and of course to stop the infringement. And if the company considers that this is going to be important, they can offer a compensation to the consumers. But this is just starting now, this system. So it comes a bit close to the US system, which you mentioned, where you say in the US there's been this compensation which has been obtained for consumers, but this compensation was negotiated by the main consumer protection agency in the US, which is the Federal Trade Commission, on the basis of a fairly strong legal basis that they have for enforcement. And the US is one country, so here we are dealing clearly with a scattered system in all the member states, and for the moment what we can offer is coordination. And then you have private enforcement, and private enforcement means individual people or collective redress or actions undertaken by, for example, by consumer associations. And there, the Commission has no role to play, absolutely no role to play. We are just providing the enabling framework, legal framework, and ensuring the member states are applying it correctly in the implementation.
Thank you very much. As I see, we got more questions. I think we could have one or two more, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Masai Kushubek from FH because he would like to ask something.
Thank you very much for giving the floor. I'm just listening to the debate, and so basically I was wondering, so who we are talking about car owners, but who will compensate patients who are not car owners, whose chronic disease are linked to actually illegal emission, illegal emissions. I think it would be good also to think about that and integrate it into the debate and for any policy discussion decision about it. Thank you.
We got one interesting question related to this, and someone would like to ask from Ms. Benassi that Mr. Šefčovič did an excellent speech, but he didn't mention the patient. If you have any opinion or remark concerning that? And before that, I would like to give some time to think about the answer. I would like to ask Mr. Friedrich, because he showed that he would like to have a comment.
Yes, I want to inform you that we have 4 other court cases in this month against Volkswagen at our highest court in Germany. Another one is settled against Daimler in October, and also it's very likely the court case of DOH against KBA, the German certification agency, will be handled at the European Court of Justice, because we think the certification was not legal. So which also will handle, of course, a number of issues we have talked about. And my proposal to ask for external cost covers the request just mentioned, that we also cover the health cost.
Ms. Benassi, the floor is yours.
Yes. No, I fully understand that there are a lot of environmental losses or costs and losses of health on the health side, and it's not my domain, but my understanding is that can be, of course, a subject of cases or court cases made by individuals in certain member states, and in certain member states, but not many of them, on the basis of the existing collective redress actions. They can also bring group of patients represented by associations of patients or by lawyers, can bring collective cases. But as for all this, the first problem is that they do not exist in all the member states, and the second problem is that it may be extremely long processes, because it depends on how the court system, the civil courts, or I don't know, maybe environmental courts function in member states, and also how the lawyers of the party which is accused play. And what we see is that in the present cases, Volkswagen lawyers are really playing everything they can to slow the process. Because, for example, there is one collective case in Italy where the representing consumers where I think something like 15,000 people, car owners are involved, and Volkswagen required to check all the details of each of these persons. So you can imagine how much time it takes. And so this is a delaying technique that is used in collective redress cases. That is well known. It's not only this company, many companies are doing that in order to sort of gain time, save time. At a certain moment, there are a number of people who just abandon and so on. So it's unfortunate, but this is a typical technique that is used in the European Union and which is more successful in certain countries where legal proceedings are already known for being very long and complex.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of your excellent presentations and excellent answers. I would like to summarize a little bit what happened today, and the main message for us that we should continue this discussion. And I have to inform you that 2 days ago, the last session of the Environment Committee meeting, we voted for towards the car emission issues that we would like to end the gap between lab and real driving emission tests. And we had a political consensus in the ENVI committee, and we voted this amendment, which will go to the plenary session in September. So we keep on our work. You see that István is vice chair of the transport committee and member of the ENVI committee. So he will face to all aspects of the issue, and he is member of the social democratic family, so the consumer rights are very important for us as well. So what we suggest, and thank you very much for the organizers of this excellent webinar, that we should continue this in September, and we are ready to host this kind of event in the future, and we need your background information continuously. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.